Ladies and gentlemen, very warm welcome to this session. The topic of this panel today is building an inclusive digital ecosystem, a very topical, very relevant topic in the era that we are living in. And I have an extremely esteemed panel to have this discussion today. So I'll quickly go through a round of introductions. Excuse me. Though, we had a little bit of introductions that they were not clearly audible. So, on my left, Professor Dr. Inder Gopal. He is the CEO of Urban Data Exchange. Vivek Tyagi, extreme left. He is the chairman of Indian Electronics and Semiconductor Association, ISA, old colleague and good friend. I see sitting right to me. He's the director, product line management, PPC Broadband, Mr. Rahul Thakur, sitting over there. Director software development for GX Group, and Avdhesh, sitting right there. Is the director for Detecvision. So this is, in terms of the representation, pretty sort of, widespread sort of, experiences and skill set. Before we start, as I was driving, I took a ride, shared ride to the venue today. Kind of experience came in mind the first time I attended the Convergence India show almost 20 years back. I remember I used to live in Bangalore at that time. Remember coming straight from the airport, changing the SIM. That time, you moved to a different city, you changed your SIM, took a black and yellow, hustled to get to the right gate. And then the usual hustle that you have in settling down your payment. And as I seamlessly landed at gate 4, the memory went to how much we have covered in this period of time, and which speaks a lot about the evolution of all things digital and a digital ecosystem around us. Many of us saw. Just in last several months, as India assumed the G20 presidency, representatives from all G20 countries, particularly from the developed world, feeling extremely surprised about the spread of digital wallets, payment systems, and QR codes literally everywhere. Right? So clearly, India is taking a strong step, but for a country of 140 billion. We need a much more inclusive ecosystem, and perhaps this is another area where we can be a leader. So over the next 45 minutes or so, we'll try to have this discussion, figure out what is the wave, what is going on, and how do we achieve this ambitious vision. So let me start first with Dr. Inder Gopal. Sir, IUDX is a very innovative initiative. Many in the audience would have heard about all kinds of exchanges, the stock exchanges, the commodity exchanges. Building an ecosystem, a digital ecosystem requires, all of us would realize that requires a lot of data exchange. Would you please help the audience understand what exactly is the mandate of IUDX? And what are you trying to charter out, and how would it help really evolve a digital ecosystem? Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me? Hello? Okay, good. All right. So I hope it continues to work. So thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. I think. Rajesh has talked about inclusivity, right?
and in a digital ecosystem. And a key aspect of that is having data, right? Being able to understand, for citizens, what's going on, right? In terms of their personal, data, personal information, in terms of, what's going on in the city, having, the ability for city administrators to be able to act upon data, to be able to, deal with traffic issues or, sanitation issues, things like that. So there's the ability to share data, the ability to use data in a productive way is a critical aspect of enabling a public infrastructure, right? A public digital ecosystem. And so we've about 4 years ago, I'm from the Indian Institute of Science, and we have been doing a lot of, let's say, research work on some technologies related to sharing data. What kind of security mechanisms, how do you represent the data in terms of data models, things like that. And we met the team, the new team at that time, from the Smart City mission in the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, led by Mr. Kunal Kumar. And they kind of described to us a situation in India's emerging cities, which exactly kind of matched the technologies that we were working on. And what they said is, look, there's a lot of data available in Indian cities, tons of data. We put in sensors, we've done all kinds of things, we have, but most of that data is really sitting there unused. It's sitting in silos. Part of the reason is sometimes nobody even knows that the data is there. So the police department may, for example, have put in a set of traffic sensors or cameras, and it's collected a whole lot of information which could be of value for the fire department. Maybe when they dispatch a fire engine, but they don't even know that the data is available. Forget being able to access that data. So just even having the ability to understand that what data is there is critically important. Being able to control, who gets access to the data. I mean, a lot of this data, you may think you would like to publish in the open, but some of it might be sensitive in nature. So while you may want to make it available, you want to make it available to the right people, right? So you want to have some kind of authorization, some kind of access control, some kind of rules-based policies which can be enforced. And then the third aspect is the ability to be able to understand the data, right? And if you look at a lot of the data that's coming in, it may be representing exactly the same thing. For example, data from different air quality sensors in the city, right? Represent the same information, but they're modeled in very different ways, right? Ranging from different labels for the same gases, different metrics, different units, things like that. So they said, well, can you try to fix this problem for us? So that's when we started building this India Urban Data Exchange to solve exactly this set of problems. To be able to find the data, to be able to control the sharing of data, to be able to understand and standardize the way data is represented. And that's kind of where we started the journey. We built a platform, which is now a cloud-based open source, which is another very important aspect, I think, of all public infrastructure. It's an open source initiative. It's a cloud-based initiative. It's now deployed in 35 cities. And we have enabled a whole bunch of interesting use cases, right? I mean, just to give you very, very quickly, I mean, in Varanasi, for example, the cost of solid waste management, garbage collection, has gone down by 30% by using the data that we are collecting and optimizing the movement of garbage trucks, right, for pickup. In Vadodara, we have been able to use data, real-time data from traffic lights, from ambulances and so forth, to essentially provide a green corridor for emergency vehicle movement, including ambulances. So when you want to take a patient to the hospital, as much as possible, the lights are in your favor, and maybe we can perhaps contribute to saving some lives. So these are some examples. Flood management, multimodal transit, tons of things like that. And we can talk much more, but I want to stop and give my other panelists a chance.
Thanks so much. So let me move to IC. A digital ecosystem requires digital infrastructure, obviously, and a very widespread and efficient broadband is absolutely critical from that perspective. So, from your point of view, how do you see this infrastructure coming up, and what kind of challenges that you are seeing?
Good morning. Hello. Yeah. Good morning. I'll actually start from where Dr. Inder stopped. He is an agent who is actually bringing in tons of data to the cloud. But then that cloud, if people have to access the data, we will need infrastructure, and that's where we come into picture. We are basically building infrastructure for the whole country, and in many places around the world as well. But one of the things that we will have to understand here is that if we don't have the quality of infrastructure that we put together in the way that the people right now in this world are really bandwidth hungry, and if they have to access all these data, we will need a very good infrastructure. Basically, fiber is one technology which actually gives seamless bandwidth to people. But the way the bandwidth, the infrastructure is constructed here in India and in different parts of, especially the developing world, is not, I would say that it's not up to the mark, basically because of the lack of standard practices. Earlier we used to actually look at the country's welfare with what you call the number of highways and the bridges and roads and things like that. Today, it is actually counted in terms of the amount of bandwidth that your information highways can cater. And that's where we will all have to think very aggressively on how we can improve the QoS. And to improve the QoS, it is important that we have to build a robust infrastructure as well. Now, there is a need for everybody in this whole food chain to understand the need for how we can build a proper infrastructure that actually caters to the market, caters to the people who are accessing this data. I think we'll have to have a lot of thought about it, and which is something that we'll discuss eventually in the course of discussion.
Thanks, IC. So, Rahul, let me come to you. Staying on the same context of the infrastructure part, IC elaborated on the broadband deployment, this becoming almost pervasive. I would like to ask you to share with the audience what kind of technologies that you see emerging. Obviously, fiber plays and fiber to home. These are some of the new sort of frontiers. How do you see this all evolving, and what is your sort of vision in this?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to answer that question in 4 parts. So, the first thing that we are seeing emerging from 2023 is in terms of demands globally. Now we are seeing that we are at a point where anywhere in the globe, we are almost looking at similar requirements. Now that makes our lives easier because we don't have to roll out different set of technologies and products for different parts of the world. The second aspect is in terms of the kind of evolution that is happening inside the home. So far, the challenge was to bring the fiber to the home. Now we are seeing more and more demand of increasing the experience inside the home, where we see the emergence of mesh deployments, where we see the evolution of Wi-Fi 5 to Wi-Fi 6, 6E, 7 and beyond. And a lot of use cases open up in terms of interaction of these in-home devices in addition to providing good services, to also going into the space of IoT of things. So that's a very interesting use case that we see building up going forward from 2023. The third aspect is the way open source is kind of the acceptance and the demand for it is increasing in the market. It is also to be seen from the perspective that not just the acceptance and demand for it is increasing, but the kind of standardization that open source solutions are right now offering to the people is at a very, very mature level. And it is kind of fast becoming the norm to have open source platforms running on the devices. And the fourth aspect is on the core side of the network. Whenever we talk of emerging technologies, we cannot, especially while we are sitting in India, we cannot forget about the cost aspect of it. We have to be cost sensitive. Technology has to be made accessible to people, and to make it accessible to people, it has to be done in a cost effective way. And one of the emerging trends that we see there is the convergence of the core network between the 5G signaling and the traditional fiber. And right now, our vision is to increasingly going forward from 2023 to kind of bring the core signaling part to a convergent level, so that the rollout also becomes easier and cheaper for the ISPs, reduce the redundancies in terms of maintenance of networks from the ISP perspective, and also to kind of see, I would personally like to see the rollout of services like IPTV on a massive scale in Indian cities going forward to start with. So these are basically the four in terms of technologies that we are seeing, and we are looking forward to making major contributions in these regions.
Thank you, Rahul. So let me come to you, Avdhesh. We talked about the data exchange. We talked about the infrastructure part. But as they say, ultimately it's about content. What we are talking about citizens, we are talking about customers, we are talking about individuals, employees, all consuming data. So Avdhesh, in this era of WhatsApp University, YouTube channels, we have seen a plethora of opportunity that have emerged in terms of content creation. But where you are, what you see as some of the emerging trends, and what are some of the high priorities that you see on the content part, if we have to build a very robust digital ecosystem?
Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you so much for ESC and Convergence to organize this. Coming back to your question, in marketing there's a say, content is the king. So as far as your content is not right, it doesn't matter what you throw out in the consumers, it will go waste. If you look at the stats, by 2022, the global content consumption has been completely doubled. This means the data that people were using access and consuming earlier, it has been completely changed by the double digits now. Another aspect that you look at the content, we are generating a lot of data in multiple areas, but till the time the data will not become consumable for the user, it's not content, it's still data. So the journey from data till content is something very, very critical. So we have data, but we are not able to consume it. The way you look at right now, the social media, people are putting a lot of content, and there's a shift. People are moving away from Facebook to Instagram because they don't want to get overloaded with the content that they're not happy with. So it's very critical for us to build the kind of content and the organizations are building, especially for the consumers to understand and consume and then react on them.
Over to you. So, during the pandemic, Avdhesh, we saw certain elements really coming out, right? Entertainment, education services. Do you see that sustaining, and then you see some more addition to content consumption that you see?
Yes. So if you look at the pandemic time, the education was one of the vertical people were not thinking that, education can be done online. But after the pandemic hit, there was a lot of acceptance in the people. The kind of content people are creating nowadays, now people are getting into a hybrid model where people are taking the classes offline, but online is something which is undeniable. People will always be using the online content. the contents are getting more and more personalized. Just to give an example, in one of the marketing campaign, as India is one of a very unique market. When you run a campaign here in English all over the pan India, the results are very different. The moment you go ahead and convert that content to regional languages, the results and the conversions are at a different level altogether. And that we have seen in multiple companies, multiple campaigns. So getting to the consumer in a very personalized manner and converting the content in a regional language also affect a lot to the people.
Thank you. So let me come to you, Vivek. The next important aspect for us is how do we deploy the technology in a cheaper and efficient manner? The world of tech is fast, emerging, ever changing, ever evolving. Now, being digital means there will be constant innovations and upgrades and the related aspects. So how, as the technology evolves and as we become a digital society, how do you see that the technologies will be implemented in an efficient manner, faster manner, and in a cheaper manner?
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. So, as Rajesh introduced, I represent the semiconductor industry here. So, first, before answering your question, let me give a context of semiconductor here, relevance of it to this panel and context here. If you look at the India's import data for last financial year, the largest amount of dollars our country spent was for importing oil, which is, I think, all of us know, and it's going on for several decades. But historically, number 2 item on which India spent dollars to import was gold. But last year, electronics overtook the import of gold in the country. It's not that our appetite for gold has gone down as a country, but looks like our appetite for electronics has gone much more than the gold. So, because given that context that our GDP is growing, per capita GDP is growing, as consumers, as enterprises, our need for electronic equipment is also growing very rapidly. As we can see, more digitization means more digital infrastructure and more hardware also required. And semiconductors are at the fundamental, it's the foundation of building that infrastructure. So it's important that there is some level of self-reliance or Atmanirbharta that we build as a country on building this hardware infrastructure. Software-wise, we are already a competent and well-proven country. If we depend completely on importing the global standard equipments, then obviously neither our cost can be the right in terms of the hardware infrastructure, nor all the features, etc. can be tailor-made to our country. Only when we have the capability to design our own infrastructure here, design our own hardware, we can optimize the cost structure both from the hardware and software perspective. So that's, I think, one part of Rajesh that we are doing. And to that extent, I would say a lot of indigenization of this hardware design and local manufacturing is taking shape in last couple of years, which is definitely the step in the right direction to have the most optimal infrastructure that is needed for our country. I think we are moving in that direction, Rajesh.
Thank you. So let me move back to the exchange part and come back to you, Dr. Inder. When we talk of a digital ecosystem, building a robust digital society, it would also entail a lot of government to citizen interfaces, communication, and that brings to the fore the point that how much data to collect, how to keep it secure, how about privacy. So as you are building this entire the exchange infrastructure, how do you address that? How do you see this? And then would you be able to share some of the success stories?
Yeah, it's a long question, but let me try to start. I think, you talked about collection of data, right? And I think when you think about data, there's two categories of data. There's personal data and non-personal data. I think with non-personal data, right, like data that comes from the sensors in the city, traffic sensors or air quality sensors, or information about where the potholes are, or where the garbage pickups have happened. I mean, this should be public, right? And so I think privacy and these things are not that relevant there, and maybe in a slightly subtle way they are. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But for the most part, the incentive with non-personal data should be to encourage sharing, right? And to try to push as much as this non-personal data out, either in a controlled way or in an open fashion, and make it available to citizens, make it available to third parties who want to take the data and create interesting applications and services. And so I think that's the incentive with non-personal data. With personal data, which relates to an individual, right, the incentive is actually totally different, right? I mean, and I think the primary incentive there, or the primary mandate, let's say, should be privacy, right? It should be really the privacy and the rights of the individual, and enabling the individual to have control of the way the data is used. And we have right now in Indian Parliament, we have a data privacy bill, which has, I think, been cooking for some time. It was originally modeled on a European standard called GDPR, right, which many of you might be familiar with, which actually has some very good principles in it, right? I mean, it says that, you must get consent. When you get data from somebody, personal data I'm talking about, you must get consent from that person, right? And you must get consent for a particular purpose. And you must only take data that is relevant to fulfilling that purpose. And you must only use the data to fulfill that purpose. And you must keep the data for some limited period of time, for which that purpose is intended, and then you should get rid of the data. So there are a few very strong, well-written principles. And I think, if we can somehow adopt them, either through the bill that's currently in there or through other legislation or regulation, I think that would be extremely valuable for personal data. I think for privacy though doesn't necessarily get solved by GDPR, right? Or by using the principles of GDPR. Privacy actually needs more than that. I mean, just getting consent is not enough. Sometimes people think, well, if I take personal data and I get rid of all the personal information and I publish it, then it becomes non-personal data. So I de-identify the data, right? And that's something that people have traditionally done. Take out all the addresses and names and then publish the data. Now, there was a paper recently, not recently, maybe a few years ago, from the US, where they looked at some healthcare data that had been published in this fashion, and where the health information was published, but all the personal details about each individual were taken out, right? So you think, well, this is harmless, but it turns out you can take that information, that health information, you can correlate it with other databases that exist, publicly available databases, and you can reconstruct something like 40% of the identifying information for the health records. Right, so by doing some clever correlation, looking at other sources, you can actually go back and figure out 40% of the names from what originally was intended to be completely anonymized, de-identified data. So privacy requires really a lot of thought and there are a lot of sophisticated mathematical techniques like differential privacy. Right, where you add some randomness to the data, but you still allow the data to be used in terms of aggregate computation of metrics or results, or multi-party communication or secure enclaves. There's a whole bunch of different techniques, and I think we have to start looking at some of those techniques, figuring out how we can layer on top of our ability to share data. Right? How we can layer some of these technologies that automatically, in a very carefully thought out fashion, add privacy, add the security of the individual. And other countries have done things like this. So, for example, the U.S. Census, right? When it is information from the U.S. Census, when it's published, it is published together with differential privacy. You cannot get raw census data, right? Because they deem that would identify, that could be used to reverse engineer the identity of individuals. So they give you census data with differential privacy. So it kind of masks the identity of the individual. So these are techniques that we have to look at, that we have to kind of understand. They're still relatively nascent, they're not mature, but I think as they mature, we have to incorporate them into some of the systems that we are building.
Any recent success stories that you saw locally in India?
Success stories in terms of the
smart city deployments.
I would say there are many. I mean, I gave, for example, I don't know if I mentioned, in what we have done. There's we've had a lot of success in cities like Varanasi, reducing cost of the solid waste by 30%, right? Solid waste management 30%. In Agartala, we were able to dramatically reduce the cost of the traffic management and create an automatic traffic management system, which at a fraction of the cost of the original vendor, because again, data was available. Flood management in Chennai, right? Being able to predict floods more accurately using data from multiple flood sensors, from meteorological information, from topography data, all those kinds of things. Being able to do in Surat more accurate prediction of bus arrivals, which is not that hard, but also bus occupancy, right? So how do you predict bus occupancy? Because there's no counter on the bus, right? So, but what there is a ticket machine, which the conductor gives a ticket every time someone comes on, and you can take the number of tickets that are being issued, and you don't know when the people get off, but you can apply some models and use some kind of learning techniques to get a pretty good occupancy estimate of a bus using the fare collection system, the automatic fare collection system. So these are all things which we have done. But I would say, look, I mean, this is not a sprint. This is a marathon, or maybe a 100-mile walk. We have to get to the. I mean, we're not going to get there overnight, right? I mean, it's going to take a long time. But we have to be perseverant, right? We cannot just give up. Well, nothing's happened. So let's throw up our hands and go on and do something else. I mean, we have to understand this is what we need to do, and empowering our citizens, I think, is obviously a critical aspect of that. So,
sure. Nevertheless, very impressive. And then in a large country like India, these are great start points, I would say. Let me come back to you, IC. We talked about the technology deployment. We talked about the challenges of infrastructure development, etc. When we talk about India is no one homogeneous entity, right? You have 30% of India's GDP comes from small and medium enterprises. No robust ecosystem or digital ecosystem can be successful unless the small and medium enterprises, which are really core of the business in India, are taken along. So how do you see them adopting the digital infrastructure?
While we speak about the data privacy and all that stuff, one thing we all have to understand is, or we have to remember the fact that more than 50% of the world's population is still offline. They have not got access to data that we are actually talking about. They have not even come to the open, so there is no question of privacy being exposed. So it's a major challenge for us to build an infrastructure which can connect all these people who are right now offline to bring into the ecosystem. So we are actually talking about bringing these people into the digital ecosystems, and it requires a lot of effort to be put in to make sure that the infrastructure is actually being created. In the Indian scenario, I think it is one of the one of the very heartening things to notice that we have very much distributed this rollout of infrastructure. For example, if you look at the line of infrastructure creation in this country, you can actually see that the ISPs, like the major internet service providers, are still there, looking at access to all these people. At the same time, we have got an MSO, LCO way of distributing the fiber to the home technology, which gives access to the people. And that's one of the reasons why, if you look at India as a country and India as a place where the infrastructure, if you look at the infrastructure of this country, you will see that many of the people are wirelessly and wiredly converted or have access to this particular infrastructure. So the data that we are talking about can be accessed by a lot of people because of the infrastructure that we have. Again, I'm coming back to, and this can only be possible if we get the MSMEs and SMEs to actually come into the fold and get them to start working on this. Fortunately, the LCOs and MSOs can be actually treated as MSMEs and MSMEs and SMEs who are actually contributing to it. But there are many other countries where the ISPs have the sole responsibility of laying out the infrastructure, which I think there is a need for them to learn from India and how we have actually done the rollout of communication infrastructure in the country. So I think the future is positive in the way that we have rolled out the infrastructure in India, and there is a lot of privatization also that's happening in this, which actually encourages people to put the infrastructure in place.
Thank you. So coming to you, Rahul. Rahul, I have the same question for you. So IC spoke about the small and medium part of our ecosystem. How about homes? As I said, India is no homogeneous entity. How do you see the technology deployment for a digital experience in the homes outside of metro centers?
It's a very interesting trend that we are seeing. So, one aspect of it is so we are kind of moving towards a direction where we have to make technology simpler if we have to help it reach to the households outside of the major cities of India or across the globe. And therein, it is essential to kind of move towards a do-it-yourself model. And if you have to move towards a do-it-yourself model, one of the most important thing that becomes is the deployability of your products should become much more simpler. It should be as good as a plug and play. Second of all, traditionally we have seen that, and not just traditionally, we still are a market wherein with the devices that you get, if you want access to broadband or high-speed internet, you are dependent on the ISPs or the LCOs for providing you the equipment. We see a very, very huge opportunity, and we are working in a direction where we can make this market also B2C to give the people and the households in big and small cities alike the option to choose the kind of devices that they want to deploy based upon their choice, based upon their needs. So that is one thing that we really see would help the rollout of technology. And as I said earlier as well, it is again then about making the deployability of these products extremely simple, essentially a plug and play. The second aspect of it is the understandability of this technology. With the major ISPs, we don't face this problem, but I think IC will agree with me. LCOs typically they are looking for a solution not just for giving the device and deploying it at home, but also in terms of managing the networks and making the overall deployability of technology easier. And so therein we are also kind of the new future platforms that we are building. We are also looking at very scalable multilingual options in terms of the UIs that we are building towards the platform. And of course, they have to be open source, so they can be very easily scaled into or expanded into the needs of the LCOs. And also, it has to kind of become, so you should be, simply put, be able to order something from Amazon, get it, power on it and push a button and be able to use the services at your home. So that is the sort of things we are looking at in the future, which we think will really empower the cities outside the major centers to get access to high quality broadband.
Thank you. Let me come to you, Avdhesh. So we talked about the infrastructure, we talked about the small and medium universe. How about the language question? So I'm just transposing the India 1 and India 2 to a multilingual country like India. How do you see the content in a vernacular manner? Also, do you see an Indian way of doing the content?
Thank you for the question. It's a very interesting one, and it's remind me India as a position right now we are in. And so there's a book called Possibility of Potential, written by Mr. Samir and Shalini Kamboj. In this particular book, there is a matrix called possibility and potential, right? I may have the possibility of building something, but if potential is not there to execute that in the market, whatever I build will not be used. Vis-a-vis, possibilities are there to use the services and the product, but if I am not able to build it and my potential is not there, I won't be able to use that particular opportunity to do something. If you look at India right now, India is at the right place where we have a lot of good technology and disruptive technologies coming in. India is ready, and I'm really, really happy to see the way the government of India is taking the initiative of building the exchange, making and building that basic foundation that we require. So recently we have been actively involved in building the health exchange. So India, the way they have UPI, the same way we are also having the unified health exchange, and we have been active part of it. So what government is doing in one of our company, Vitria, we are making this interface where hospitals and insurance companies can talk to each other in a very similar language, and all the data of the person can be used and shared by the other doctors to the previous health record. So doctor can see the history of the person when they go for the second opinion. So all those things, I think the foundation right now we're building up. Content, as I would say earlier, also play a very critical role. If you look at right now, companies are also getting changed. Right now, I don't need to sit and read the content. My content is readable by Siri or Alexa. I can ask them. My websites have been tuned so that it can be read by the machines, right? Machine learning is coming in, AI is already there. It's not a fantasy anymore, it's just out there. ChatGPT is taking over the internet nowadays. Every second video on YouTube, you will be able to see talking about ChatGPT and how to use it. Content has to be very, very personalized. The more personalized you make the content for the Indian consumer, the better reach and the reliability of the person will be with the brand, which is very, very critical. For my views, organizations and the companies have to go a little extra, in their efforts to bring the regional content for the people, because India is not all English. In the various areas in India, people still speak Hindi, Tamil, Telugu, and you have seen these applications like InShots, all these regional news applications. Their downloads and data are way higher than any of the national English media news languages. So I think it's very important.
Very interesting. So Vivek, let me come to you. You spoke about the Atmanirbhar campaign, and as a representative of the industry, one thing is very clear, that a very robust ecosystem will require a very robust local base also. So, and we have examples of countries like China, Taiwan, US obviously in front of us, where they have a very strong, robust local ecosystems. Do you see some similar local systems on ODM side evolving? And how are they doing? And how do you see them evolving over the next few years?
Very relevant question, Rajesh. Since you mentioned China and Taiwan, I just observed on the list of sponsor, the platinum sponsor is a MediaTek, which is a semiconductor company from Taiwan for this conference itself. So it's very evident that, just to put things in context for the audience, roughly 50% of the electronics is manufactured out of China historically, and 40% of the semiconductor chips are manufactured out of Taiwan. So historically, those countries have evolved in this domain, and it will take us a while. But the good news is, if you remember dialogue of Amitabh from Diwar movie, he says, "Mere paas maa hai." Ma here means market for me. Today we have a large market for electronics. It starts with market. If there's a market and if there's a demand, then the OEM and ODM ecosystem will start to build out. And we are seeing building out of this ecosystem, coupled with some of the policies of the government like the production-linked incentive schemes, which incentivize global and Indian companies to manufacture these equipments here. It is starting to build out, but it will take several more years before we are at par with, let's say, the most developed nations in the world in terms of electronic manufacturing. But we are definitely moving in the right direction.
Thank you, Vivek. So, on that note, this has been a very patient audience. We have few minutes, and if there are any questions from the audience, please do raise your hand, take the mic, and you can direct your question to anybody in the panel.
Hi, my question goes to Rahul. Rahul, if you look at the 5G rollouts that are happening, the biggest opportunity is a fixed wireless access, and the inhibiting factor today is the device and the price that goes into the customer home. You just mentioned that the way forward is for these devices to be available and a plug-and-play system. If you could just elaborate a bit more in 23, second half, and 24, what do you see the device evolution for fixed wireless access on 5G in India?
Thank you very much for your question, sir. I would like to say that not just the aspect of the devices inside the home for the 5G, we are seeing if you talk of the immediate future, 2023 and 24. It is going to be more on the in-home side of devices, but going beyond 24, I think by 2025 we are going to start seeing it on the gateway side as well. Because as I said earlier as well, in the broadband forum we have already started talking about the convergence of the 5G core with your fixed broadband core with something that we call WWC, 5G wired wireless convergence. So right now you are only seeing 5G signaling happening over the wireless medium. We are right now into the space and time where we are writing the technical reports for your 5G signaling to happen on the fixed wired network as well. And then you have the option of having your WAN network as wireless or wired, as 5G or fixed line. All these components will be built into a single gateway device, which is then capable of signaling with the core network and then giving you access to the internet. Where we see that as a powerful tool is that it not only makes the access of technology easier for the end user, but it is also a big boon for the ISPs, because they don't then have to maintain separate networks on their core side for the 5G rollout versus the wired rollout versus anything else. So short term, we are seeing that it is the in-home devices that are going to end up as the endpoints for these plug and play. But yes, 2025, we really are moving in the direction for making the technology accessible for your gateway devices to also act as the endpoints.
Any other questions from the audience to any of the panelists? Yes.
Question again, Mr. Rahul. You just said IPTV, and practically it's an old concept, but now you have OTT apps being watched over TV, and literally that use case is achieved. Why do you still believe that's an ideal goal to be achieved?
Sir, I say that, thank you very much for your question, sir, but I say that with an eye towards the cities outside of the top 10 cities that we are seeing right now. IPTV, TV for that matter, let's forget about IPTV. TV is the primary source of entertainment for the mass population which are living outside the metro cities, and for the metro cities as well. We still have to keep in mind that while we are privileged enough to sit here and have access to all the OTTs, and to kind of the overall cost of the OTTs, to bear the cost of the OTTs. For the masses, it is still IPTV that we see as the major medium of entertainment. Plus, in terms of quality that you get over, let's say a picture that you're watching over IP infrastructure versus a dish antenna or any other medium, that quality is also very vastly different. So we would like to translate that quality into TV experience as well, and then again keeping an eye on the masses. We really believe that there is a strong use case for IPTV. Thirdly, we have to provide access to broadband-based services to, again, people outside of the major cities. Now, while internet is right now the major source of traction for our devices, we see IPTV as another service that can help the devices and fiber-based broadband reach end-home devices, which then opens up avenues for such beautiful use cases and further development. So that is why I keep saying that again and again.
Thank you so much.
All right, I think we have time for one more question, if there is any. If not, then
Hello. My question is to Inder sir. Sir, I think many apps are just using the data which we are just giving them. But when we install and open an app, it don't allow us to proceed further without giving the data. I mean, privacy options, they are just strict that we need to give them. So is it correct? And will it be changed by the new law that privacy law is coming? So will it be changed?
So if you register for a service, right, and you consent for that provider to provide that service, then it is reasonable for the provider to ask you information that is relevant for them to be able to deliver that service to you, right? So if you're registering for some social media app or whatever, it's not unreasonable for them to ask you information which will allow them to deliver the kind of quality of service that you might have expected. So I don't believe the privacy law will prevent private companies from asking for personal information, right? But what it will do is it will make sure that when they get the personal information, they can only use it for the purposes that they have said that that they have taken consent from the individual, right? There are many private companies which collect data, right? Yesterday I was actually I'm on the one of the committees for my society, my housing, my apartment complex, and we have just installed a new gate management system, right? Where you use an app to control who can come in and go out from your gate. You can give the information to the security guard, and the security guard will authorize the person based upon the app, and all that information is maintained in the cloud, right? And this same company that is giving us the service has something like, I don't know, I think something like 60 or 70 lakh people that are living in apartment complexes where it has, this footprint, right? So I'm just thinking it has information of who is coming into 60 or 70 lakh households, right? It has detailed information. So, the amount of data that is being collected, right, and the amount of data that is sitting in places that you may not even think about, right? Who thinks about the gate management system? But it is a treasure trove of data. And if you don't have a privacy bill, a properly crafted privacy bill, I think we are all, going to face, a lot of issues going down, as we go forward. So I'm hoping that this privacy bill actually will come out and will get put into law, and the regulations around that will be well defined and will actually work effectively to protect all of us.
all right. I think we have come to the end for the session. I'll take this opportunity of thanking the panelists for sharing very enriching thoughts. We discussed various aspects of building a robust digital ecosystem. And based on what we heard in this session today, it is very clear that India is possibly headed towards becoming a robust digital ecosystem with a very thriving, digitally empowered society. So with that, thank you so much. Thank you for being great listeners. Thank you.
Thank you to all the speakers and the moderator of the session. May I request moderator of the session, Mr. Gupta, to hand over a small token of thank you to all the speakers, starting with Dr. Gopal. Mr. Tyagi. Mr. Varghese. Mr. Thakur. Mr. Sharma. Now may I request Ruchika from Exhibition India to please come on stage and hand over the memento to moderator of the session, Mr. Gupta. Thank you so much.